Well, I'll take this off and then I'll be a little more comfortable.
She wasn't home yet when I left. She was still there
Central Square. Central Square.
Bring it in.
I'll find out now.
I'm just looking to make sure that people sit on the spots before. Hi.
I don't see Guy.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
This receipt?
Well, you know, even when I had more seniority, I had no idea. It seemed to me
He can spread out.
right.
There was supposed to be something marked here. We have one letter to read before the start of the meeting. Good evening, and welcome to the July 10th, 2019 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I'm Rosemary Keir, Chairman of the Commission. At this time, I would ask members of the Commission to introduce themselves, beginning on my far right.
John Dixon.
Susan Athenson.
Michael Freeman.
Stephen Douglas.
And our first item of business tonight will be a public hearing and action for consideration of an update to the comprehensive plan as it relates to the Waukegan Road, Settler Square Business District, and the surrounding area. It will be presented by city staff. At this time, I ask any commissioners if they have any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest to report.
No.
Seeing none, Kathy, please continue.
Thank you, Chairman Kerr, members of the commission. This matter returns to you from, I believe, your April meeting. The minutes from the April meeting were included in your packet, and the document you have in front of you and the document that's available at the back of the room indicates in black line, red line, the changes that we made in response to the commission's discussion at the last meeting. So I'll just take a few minutes just for the benefit of those who may not have been involved in this discussion in the past to just give a little bit of a background. The City Council directed that we proceed with an update to the city's comprehensive plan. The council directed that we do that in phases so that we wouldn't wait 18 to 24 months before anything was adopted. The first phase identified for this discussion was the Waukegan Road Settler Square Business District. The mayor appointed a working group. Actually, I see several of the members of that group here tonight. That group met, I believe, on 5 occasions, maybe more than that, and held a number of community input sessions. And the report, they served as advisory to staff. The report that came to you was the result of the work of that group. The comprehensive plan was last comprehensively adopted in 1998. Since that time, there were a number of interim amendments that occurred for Lake Forest Place, along the Route 60 corridor. A bicycle master plan was incorporated into it, a sustainability plan. So there were a series of 4 to 6 amendments that occurred, but this is the first time since 1998 that we are stepping back and really looking at the entire document piece by piece. Once we go through that process, we will then look back at all of the updated sections and look to unify those, integrate those as appropriate. A comprehensive plan, just to review, is different than the zoning code. A comprehensive plan really establishes a vision. It's intended to identify opportunities. It doesn't contemplate immediate change of zoning. It really looks at what if. What if a current use on the property or a current property owner leaves the site or leaves the community? What if a site becomes available? Rather than a knee-jerk reaction or a scramble to look at the right solution at that time, the comprehensive plan is intended to provide that framework. Comprehensive plan is intended to identify challenges and then perhaps present solutions to those challenges. It's intended to inform property owners, potential buyers of property. It's really intended to set realistic expectations. So that if someone moves into a neighborhood, they have an understanding of what might happen next to them. If someone buys a commercial property, they have an understanding of what might be permitted at a high level. Comprehensive plan establishes a framework for going forward and considering development proposals. I think as Commissioner Athenson pointed out, the current comprehensive plan hasn't always been used as much in that role as it could have been. As we envision the new comprehensive plan, we envision it as being a digital document, ultimately to be more readily available and really integrated not only into development decisions, but really to serve as a framework for council policy decisions, perhaps council capital budget decisions. If we identify an area as needing infrastructure improvements in the comprehensive plan, that should help guide the city council in some of their budget decisions. And in addition, the comprehensive plan should also be looked at for city facilities, perhaps additional parks, open space. If a need is identified, possible locations could be identified in the comprehensive plan, and also to help guide and support future decisions relating to public safety. So it really is more, it ideally is more than just a land use document. With that background, again, the area that was studied in this first phase was the Sedler Square Waukegan Road Business District and the areas immediately surrounding it. As we discussed last time, some of the key themes that came out included flexibility, encouraging mixed use, and in this area right here, this color, the pinkish color, if some of those properties were to redevelop, if uses were to change, to really be open to considering mixed use. At your last meeting, there was concern that that not be misinterpreted to as a way to displace or reduce the size of the commercial district. So we have added language that hopefully clarifies that any mixed use, any addition of residential in this area is intended to augment but not replace commercial uses. There were some opportunity areas identified, a city-owned parcel on the northwest corner of Telegraph and Everett Road. That parcel, at the early point of the working group's discussion, it currently is zoned commercial. The working group initially, I think perhaps until the last meeting, really was leaning toward recommending residential development on that property. And at the last meeting, there was some discussion about being open to perhaps some limited commercial use on that property, small-scale retail, small-scale office, as well as some residential. So we tried to reflect that opportunity for mixed use on that property, recognizing that any commercial or office use on that property would need to be small scale. The working group identified this 10-acre parcel located on the south side of Everett Road, east of the Chateau, Lake Forest Chateau, west of Evergreen, as really a transition parcel. Today it is zoned for 1.5 acre lots, and as you look at the configuration of the parcel, as you look at its location near the Waukegan Road Business District and train station, it really made sense to look at this as a transition from Lake Forest Chateau, which is a density of about 4.5 units per acre, Colony Square, which is a density of about 6 units an acre, and as we move all the way over to Waukegan Road, the villas, which are 12 units per acre. It really is a transition area between those higher densities and the low-density, single-family, 1.5 acre lots to the east. So looking at that as an opportunity area. Some of the other clarifications we tried to make in this latest draft, again, to call out the flexibility, we added some language about telling the story of this area, trying to give the area a character, to try and call it out. Number one, as a business district, but also to find opportunities perhaps to tell the story. It is a historically significant part of the community. There's been some discussion about actually identifying the north and south ends of the business district by signage. At a recent meeting, the Building Review Board approved some updated signage for Forest Square, and staying consistent with that design, also approved signage of a consistent design and style for the property just to the north. So we're beginning to try and set a standard with some more vertical, high-profile signage that begins to tie this area together. At your last meeting, there was talk about really working with IDOT to the extent possible to try and address congestion, address need for turn lanes, through hardscape or through signage, really try and increase the visibility of crosswalks. So that language has been added. Also, at the request of the chairman, we added a map that identifies existing pedestrian connections, existing sidewalks, and identifies some additional potential for future pedestrian connections. In particular, the working group, I think on one of the walking tours, talked about the fact that this residential area right now doesn't really have direct access to Sunset, and could there be some kind of a welcoming, convenient pedestrian connection through that area. Again, the comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily identify specifically where something like that would happen, but encourages that those types of activities be looked at. I think with that, I will stop. What we're looking for tonight is really to hear from you whether we have captured accurately and adequately the comments that you all have from the last meeting. If you've had additional thoughts since then, I believe you have some comments from Commissioner Ruggles in front of you, who wasn't able to attend tonight. So to hear if you are comfortable with this document, I believe you have some members of the audience who will want to speak to you as well. At the end of the meeting, if you are comfortable, it would be appropriate to forward this to the City Council with a recommendation and support. Certainly, if you have any last-minute edits, we can incorporate that. The next step would be that we would take this before the City Council, and we would expect the council to direct us to take certain actions as a follow-up to adoption of this. Those actions might be, and I don't want to speak for the council, but for instance, a follow-up action to this might be direction from the City Council for the Building Review, for the Plan Commission to review the B1 zoning district, to see if in fact it aligns with the language here, to see if It could be clearer about the types of uses that are prohibited in that district, be clearer about types of uses that require special approval, and perhaps even incorporate performance standards, which could be more specific than our current special use permit criteria, and identify uses that would be permitted in the interest of, again, being clear with property owners, with being clear with potential tenants, and ideally streamlining the process if we can build into the code some real clear language. Action step might also be to direct our Public Works Department to work with IDOT on certain issues that have been raised. An action step might be for the council, the council might direct that staff do something to market that property or not. Again, I don't mean to speak for the council, but those are just some examples of how the comprehensive plan update might translate directly into future action. So with that, I'm going to move back over there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Have members of the public received the letter from Deborah Fisher? No. Okay. So it may be that a member of this commission might want to address that in their comments, how to incorporate that.
Sure.
Ms. Fisher has raised the question about the city-owned vacant parcel that's on the northwest corner of Telegraph and Everett Roads. It currently is allowed to be zoned for some commercial use, and at our last meeting, I believe at least one commission member, if not more, felt that commercial properties probably would not locate on that side of the railroad track, that to get a good cohesive commercial area, it would be best to keep that on the eastern portion, and perhaps consider that site for land bank, for future parking, or some potential residential development at a later time. So that was her request, just so you're aware. Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you. So Kathy, thank you for your work on incorporating many of the comments that were made in, I think you got them all, honestly, but and you anticipated a few of my questions. Zoning is not before us. Zoning would be directed, what areas to look at zoning would be directed by the city. So I think specifically as to Ms. Fisher's concern, if the city and the city council were anxious to market that property and they wanted to try and do so under the current zoning, which is commercial, they could certainly do that, and without bringing it back to the Plan Commission. And if that proved unsuccessful, then at a later date, they could bring it back to us for a reconsideration of zoning. Is that a fair?
Yes, that is a fair characterization. That area is identified as opportunity area number 4, and the recommendation that we added after your last meeting reads, encourage development of this property in the near term, as opposed to land banking it, for multifamily residential, small-scale commercial, or office uses, or a mix of low-impact uses. So I don't know whether that, and I do notice some typos in there, I don't know if that captures, but you are correct that the property today is zoned commercial. The city council, if they chose to do so, could market it as commercial. Adoption of the comprehensive plan does not change the zoning.
Right.
That would be a separate action, so you are correct.
And they could in fact market it under a mixed use of, and if the buyer came forward and expressed an interest in residential as opposed to commercial, then it would just come back to us for a review of the zoning. So I think, the city certainly, in addition to the other things that you mentioned, has the ability to move forward with that, should city council decide to do so. The way the plan is set up is very open to the use, multiple uses, and I think appropriately so. I am interested, and I thought it was a really nice addition, and I do appreciate, because I was concerned about the idea that we maintain a business district on the west side, living in the 4th Ward. I think it's very important, and I think over time, the B1 zoning has not really proven very useful, frankly, and at least in my experience being on the Plan Commission. So I do think it requires a review, and I would encourage the city council, because they can send it back to us, and we can work with the city attorney, and we can work with others, right, to see what could be done to improve that, so that we don't end up with 8 more banks on the west side of Lake Forest. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the walkability thing, the walkability part of the B1 district, I think, is already there. And I think there was a lot of thought given on the most recent bank that was approved about the walkability of that site and its connectivity to its neighboring sites and that. And so I think that was more thoughtfully approached by the Plan Commission, and the B1 zoning does allow for that. But I think we need to be, at least from my point of view, there needs to be a more definitive approach there that allows businesses to come in without having to go through, 8 to 12 months of hearings. We should, as consistent with the plan, and I do very much appreciate the time that was spent by all of the members, former Alderman Edelman, current Commissioner Douglas, and the neighbors. This is great work. I think it's helpful, but I think we do need that next piece, and so I do think it's time to do that while we're there. Otherwise, this document has no life to it if it doesn't come back.
And I
Right.
do believe, I've heard clearly from the city council that that's their intention, but this is the groundwork for that next step.
Any reason that we couldn't have conversations with IDOT now for things as minimalistic potentially as like reducing speed limits or things of that nature? Does that have to wait for city council? Can we start those discussions?
Well, if you approve this, this will likely go to the city council within a month or so. We are actually regularly meeting with IDOT because we're in discussions about the specifics of the intersection improvements at Waukegan and Everett Road. So we are also talking with some of those property owners at those 4 corners. We have not had the speed limit discussion, but it's certainly something we could. My sense is that, yes, we probably should wait for city council direction on that piece of it, but we have developed, I believe, some strong relationships with IDOT over the last 9 months in our discussions about a couple projects throughout the community.
Yeah, I see talk of new stoplights and things of that nature. Frankly, my view of it at the last meeting and continues to be that if the speed limits were changed, it's a very limited infrastructure improvement. You change the sign, and then the city can start enforcing. And it certainly is enforced at the Bannockburn side. I think that's probably the best patrolled intersection I've ever come across, and I drive through it daily.
Speaking from experience?
Yes, indeed, yeah. And so I just think that there's some steps there that maybe could be more immediate. All right, so I didn't have any other questions, and I apologize if I've taken up most of my comment section, but questions.
Commissioner Atkinson.
So Kathy, I'm glad to see that you mentioned my comment from last month about using this document in the future, because as I had mentioned, in my 6 years on BRB and 6 years on the HPC, I'd never even seen the comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to ask you, what's the thought process now on how this plan will be used? You say the city council is going to review our recommendations and then possibly recommend us to look at zoning in more detail based on the recommendations here. But going forward, is there potential for like the BRB and I don't know how much the HPC, would the lower boards be using this as a tool?
The Building Review Board actually did use this as a tool when they reviewed Forest Square, because there was a lot of discussion. The current comprehensive plan talks about buildings along the street and parking behind, and so there was a lot of discussion about that, and ultimately it ended up being what it is, and I think there are good reasons for that. I didn't mention it, but we did add language in here that as properties redevelop, that outlots closer to the street should be considered. I think part of the issue with this business district is ideally there would be some parking in front, buildings might be closer and more parking in back, you have fairly narrow commercial lots in this area, and I think what we've heard is that the parking in front really is necessary. But in answer to your question, yes, this has been used, probably not as much as it should have been used, but I know with respect to Forest Square, specifically, it was used, and I think going forward, we will just need to be more mindful of sharing the document with everyone involved in development discussions.
Because if you are saying that you're going to use it when you talk about potential development in the area, I think it needs to be a working document and a tool that everyone is aware of and that uses. Otherwise, it's pointless for us to go through this process. And I know City Council is using it to look at some potential changes in the area, but I look back at the 98 plan and what it had recommended in terms of Settlers Square, and it was a pretty forward-thinking vision, and they had some really specific character definition ideas for that area, and ultimately it failed. So I'm just wondering if we're going to go to all the trouble of making this document saying this is what we envision this area to be, how do we give it some teeth where we have the power to say, well, this is not what the community, 5 banks in 1 block is not what this community envisions this area to be because it's not the character we want. How do we get to a point where we can use this document where it means something? Is it rezoning that we do? or-
Where the teeth come in is the zoning, but again, if you're directed to look at the B1 district, your discussion will be interesting, because I think there is a balance too. If the zoning code can get as specific as the community desires, but there is some danger in that too. So that discussion will be interesting. You can put performance standards for particular types of use. We did that, the Plan Commission did that a number of years ago for restaurants. So the zoning code is where the teeth comes in, or other aspects of the code. But again, I think the discussion will be interesting because you don't want to hamstring property owners and not realize that there needs to be a balance to make uses work. And I think that's why some of the concepts in the current comprehensive plan, it's not that they weren't looked at, it's that they ultimately were determined to not be the right decision at the time. Right or wrong, as it's easy to look back.
And it brings me to another question, because, I mean, I think about going through this process in 98, and they had some really great ideas for this area that never were realized, unfortunately. And I think we're really lacking in a kind of a defined character here. So is there a process that you use to evaluate how we're meeting this plan? So for the 98 plan, did you go through at periodic checkpoints to say, oh, we're kind of meeting this plan, or this has happened here and we're not meeting it here? Is there an evaluation process about how we're meeting this plan?
I don't think we had a clear evaluation process. We certainly looked at it when developments were proposed, but certainly as we get through the different phases of the plan, we can look at a section that talks about how the plan should be used or evaluated. It could be incorporated more fully into our strategic planning process, which happens every 5 years. So I think there's some really good ideas in your comments.
Yeah, I think it's really important to say have some kind of evaluation where we're relooking at the plan, saying, are we on target? Is this the way we want to go for this area? Are we? And of course, everything's flexible, right? But you want to have a balance between what's good for a developer and what's good for the community. And if we can find that middle ground, and maybe the evaluation process helps us with that. So I think we really need to think about, one, using this as a tool, find a way where we can really use this as a tool that's valuable for all the lower boards who are making these decisions property by property, and then also come up with some kind of evaluation procedure where we are just saying, hey, remember that comprehensive plan, remember those discussions we had, this is what we had in mind for this area. So I just think it's really important for this to be a valuable tool, because you never really did evaluate the process of the 98 plan. So in your work, Steve, in your work when you did this with the working group, did you ever refer back to the 98 plan about what they had suggested for certain areas?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay, that's good. So that was part of the process here.
But I think in fairness, it's the B1 zoning district that dictates. So that's why, we've got to see that and we have to move toward that if you want to make this, I mean, this is not a ordinance. This
Right.
is not, so this document is a great overview, but if a petitioner were to come before us with something that fits within the current zoning, the board is the commission is in a very difficult position
Right,
to address that.
exactly.
So,
Well, that's kinda my
you know,
point,
I
yeah.
think that's the way you make it a living document.
Yeah, to me, the whole reason that we're going through this process is that there was finally, you know, a recognition that the zoning ordinance as it stands today really doesn't uphold what was set forth in the original comprehensive plan. And so hence modify the comprehensive plan, and in doing so, you know, examine the zoning ordinance again and hopefully tie the two together. That's sort of my take.
I want to stick to questions right now and save some of this for the
Okay.
comment, but Commissioner Douglas, because you were on that working group, I do want to
My
ask
only-
you if you have any particular questions based upon all those meetings, any questions for staff?
My only question at this point, Kathy, is that, you know, we talked briefly in the April meeting about involving a consultant at some point to refine the document. At what point would that occur? Would it wait until after an examination of the zoning ordinance, or occur before, or how do you envision that?
We actually have brought a consultant on board for Route 60. So we are beginning that process to kind of bring some unification through the different chapters. But the council does want us to proceed moving through different chapters, and once those are adopted, then go through the process of really looking at how we can integrate those better, perhaps through transportation issues, stormwater issues, sustainability issues. So yes, we will have a relook and an integration at some point in the future.
Okay, after we look at zoning, or after zoning is examined.
Well, that will be the council's decision, but my sense is that particularly in this area, the council moved this section forward because they did want to have a relook at the B1 zoning district. So
Understood.
that may not be the case for all of the sections. They may not immediately direct some action, but in this case, I think there was some urgency based on recent discussions.
That's all.
Okay. Commissioner Dixon?
I don't have a great deal to add. Obviously, most, if not all of the heavy lifting, as Commissioner Freeman stated in his comments, has occurred. And certainly a lot of thanks need to go out to all those that are involved up to this point. I just would stress the opportunity area number 3, and I guess I have a question on that, the city-owned property. Kathy, the parking over there on that west parking lot for the train station there, that's adequate now, that more than adequate for the needs that are presented there?
The parking both north and south of the commuter station is currently adequate. There was discussion, and it's reflected in this plan, that if there's additional need for parking in the area, that some consideration should be given to using those surface lots, city-owned surface lots, to look at perhaps some underground, partially underground, or deck parking, and perhaps incorporating that with, again, a mix of use, which seemed to be a theme throughout this area, was to be open to more flexibility in uses. So there also is opportunity to expand the parking that's currently on the south side of Everett Road, north of the fire station.
So it's fair to say then that parcel there that the city owns would not be as part of that, what you just described, or?
Currently, the last action that the city council took with respect to that property on the northwest corner of Telegraph and Everett Road, and this was now going back a couple of years, was to land bank it for future parking needs. This study is now recommending that those existing surface lots on the east side of Telegraph Road really should be looked at to handle parking in some way, even if they need to be enhanced. But it would be the council's decision, based on this plan, whether they wanted to continue to hold that parcel in the event that future parking is needed, or if they wanted to do something else with that property.
Okay, well, and based on that, I mean, I would stress that, and I think Commissioner Freeman said the same thing, state that, certainly be designated still as mixed-use area, number one, but then number two, that, that's something that the city council should look into, possibly selling as well. Then the other point was the opportunity area number one, just stressing that, as the overall theme of supporting the business and retail out there on the west side. That certainly, I think, comes through here in what was stated, so that's great. And then the only last part I would stress or add would be on the infrastructure and the circulation. I think that really is key to the success over there, in my opinion. And we've touched on some of that, possibly having IDOT come in and reduce the speeds that might help out, but also looking at the crosswalks, the tunnels, the turn lanes, all those other infrastructure items that should be stressed upon, because in my opinion, the more adequate and the better those become, the greater the success that area will have. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, I had a few questions, follow-ups to issues raised in the April 10th meeting. The first one, the B1 district permits multifamily residential development, but does not include language encouraging a mixed-use development, mixed-use type of development. So I see here in many of the opportunity areas that mixed-use development has been added. Is that correct?
Mixed use is added in this plan.
Right.
Obviously, the amendment, any future amendments to the zoning district would be a separate action. But yes, this plan encourages a mix of use in those specific areas.
And how would one deal with a desire on the part of the residents to not have more banks in that area? You couldn't really do spot zoning. Would you do a moratorium? How would the zoning attorney address that issue?
A moratorium is not long-term, and is not a good solution from a zoning perspective. As you look at the B1 districts, it is possible, for instance, to require a separation distance between like uses. So there are ways that you can address that. Again, I think the commission's going to have that discussion about how tightly do you want to regulate the overall area. But in the B1 district, you can be very specific about what uses you want, what uses you don't want, and again, performance standards for those uses. You can get as specific as saying, building heights need to be X and setbacks need to be Y. But that will be a later discussion, and again, I think it's a balance in how much do you want to control, where do market forces come in and what's appropriate for the zoning to regulate. But that's where, if you want to control specific uses, it would be done in the zoning code itself.
I do recall in our discussion with approving the special use for Chase in the 4th Ward, that the council for Chase specifically identified the fact that we don't have a moratorium anymore. It wasn't allowable use in B1. There was no way the city could restrict a bank from coming in at that point. So if it's still a concern for the 4th Ward, that might be something city council would address with zoning council.
And that, again, would be a discussion that comes back to the commission.
Yes, right. What also came up in the last meeting was, is Old St. Patrick's Church or the Rectory locally designated landmark or on the National Register?
Neither are locally designated, and they are not in a historic district. Certainly, the property owners could request that. It's not normally something that the city would impose without property owner consent.
And we're not currently anticipating any changes in that land use, but since it was part of a larger parcel, it was part of the April discussion. Then the last one, question for me is that 10-acre parcel that really only has an access point onto Everett Road to, I guess, encourage city council that we would like to see some ability to have that land developed, perhaps as residential. I think we're zoning it now for residential, aren't we?
It is currently zoned for residential use. What this plan recommends is that it be rezoned to allow a denser development.
Right.
And yes, that was one question that came up at the April meeting that I neglected to respond to. I think I included some language. Encourage development. The city can't require that the development be integrated with the development to the west, but that is something that the working group discussed, that there may be an opportunity there to integrate that parcel in some way with the existing development to the west. So we can certainly encourage that, but again, can't mandate that happen.
Right, but for those who weren't here in the April meeting, the idea being that if we could have a greater concentration of citizens in that area to frequent retail establishments, it would help us get more development in that area. Any other questions from commissioners to staff?
I have a couple questions, Kathy, just so I understand this. So if for some, if we decide, or St. Pat's decides they want their building landmark and the cemetery landmark, is that rezoned? Do we rezone that area around it, or is it just a landmark building within a residential area?
If the owner chose to do so, they could nominate the property for a local landmark designation. That would go to the Historic Preservation Commission, and just that property. It wouldn't change the zoning. Local landmark designation is something different than zoning. And what it would mean is that if a property was locally landmarked, that any changes to that structure would then be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission as opposed to the Building Review Board.
Is it possible to rezone residential areas to provide protection to a historic district? I mean, so let's say, I'm just wondering, if this is potentially a residential area and we have a developer comes in that wants to build homes on there because it's zoned that way and decides that, the building, even though it's landmark, is not that important, and they get permission to knock down a landmark building, there's really nothing to stop them from doing that, right? The zoning will allow them to do that. Am I correct?
Again, zoning is different than landmark designation. If a locally landmarked property is proposed for demolition, that requires review by the Historic Preservation Commission, and they would review it based on their standards.
But if they give it permission to demo a landmark building, there's no protection there. Essentially zoning will allow them to do that. Okay,
Yes,
I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could zone something to protect it if it's considered historic. There's no other kind of zoning besides the residential and the,
Again, zoning is separate than designation, and there is, even if a property is designated, there is a process to request approval of demolition.
Right.
So zoning wouldn't
protect it,
protect a property from being demolished.
which we've seen already. Okay, and the other question I had was, with that big 10-acre parcel, I had mentioned something about creating a green space within that property, but we can't mandate that within the development, can we, at this level? That's more for like the BRB to do, or?
Certainly, if that parcel's developed, it would need to have on-site detention. So it would need to meet the requirements of the subdivision chapter. If there had been an certainly the city could try and acquire property if they felt a park was needed. But in this case, that property is designated residential. Today, it's zoned residential. So a public open space wouldn't be something that we could require. However, property or development could be clustered to provide open space, there could be setbacks, and that would be something that comes back before the Plan Commission, when a development is proposed for that site.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be correct that zoning could, if the property is going to be upzoned to allow more density, then the zoning could require a certain amount of open space? Not necessarily public, but open.
There could be special zoning on that property.
Right.
Again, I think that's a balance, and it's a difficult property to develop anyway because of its long, narrow configuration.
I think that's where we need the consultant, and that's where we need the city attorney and someone to talk to us about those things. Because I think the density that you choose, I think the work that this group has done in highlighting the transitional nature of this property and the difficulty it is to develop it, and which is, it's been in and out of litigation, and there's been all kinds of issues with this property. I know it's from a development standpoint, I mean, acre and a half makes no sense. There's no way to develop it. So, but what is the right level? Is it quarter acre? Is it? And I think as we make those determinations, that's where the consultant can help us, because what will end up happening, I think, is if there is no agreement with the neighbors to the east, you're going to have to come up with a fairly creative solution to allow, maybe trade open space for density. And so we do that in overlay districts all the time. And so maybe that's something that we need to be more creative about as we think about this property, because if the only access is to Everett Road, anyway, I just think it's something that has to be considered in conjunction with, because what zoning is that we pick is going to ultimately have a density and an open space, trade-off.
And it would probably make the most sense on that property to designate this as proposed and then have a developer come in and propose, and that's where those negotiations happen, rather than through zoning trying to say, here's what needs to happen precisely on that property.
Right.
So having a plan and being able to
But you
know
could-
that that's a transitional area.
Right.
That piece of information is helpful to the property owner and helpful to a developer, to have the freedom to know it's designated as transitional.
Right, but if you took it from, acre and a half to, whatever category that would attract potentially, right? It's one less hurdle for a developer and could encourage that kind of discussion. So I just think we've got to think about that as we think about the zoning aspects of it. And I think that's where the trade-off between green space and density will happen.
That's where the details happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are including in the recommendations on that, designate the area, this 10-acre parcel, for attached or detached housing units at a density that provides an appropriate transition between the densities to the east and west, which opens the door for a developer and invites a larger conversation at that time, which could be next year, could be 5 or 10 years from now, which is why it's difficult to put a lot of specifics in, because the markets will change over time. Any other questions from commissioners to staff? Then at this point, I would like to swear in all parties intending to testify. I have one person up here now, and I also would like to recognize at this time several members in the audience that I see who were members of the working group, along with Commissioner Douglas. Working group members, Chairman Mike Edelman, group members Richard Sugar, Eileen Luby Weber, John Cortese, Jack Frigo, Dennis Muhlmans, Bob Shaw, and Stephen Douglas. So please, anyone who wishes to give testimony tonight, will you please, if you haven't already passed in a card with your name and address, please do so. Then I will call Mr. Sugar. And Mr. Sugar, would you please stand? Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
First, I want to thank the commissioners for the thoughtful review that they've made of our work product. We did spend a lot of time and effort and consideration thinking about ways to improve that site. I'm now going to speak, though, about my own personal input as opposed to representing the entire work group. And that is the identity issue of the area, as Commissioner Atherton has mentioned a couple of times, to us was very, very important. Because right now it's a plain vanilla shopping center. And who wants to go to a plain vanilla shopping center? And what we were trying to do is make it an attractive, basically an attractive West Lake Forest town center. And when I think of that, I think of maybe banners on the lampposts that identify the beginning and the end of the center, that say this is the West Lake Forest Town Center. Not just signs that say Forest Square or Sunset Corners, but that identify the whole area as one unified whole. Part of the other issue that I had was there's two different segments. There's the west side of Waukegan Road and the east side of Waukegan Road, and it's not one coherent center. And how do you make it one coherent center? That's something that really needs some creativity. The idea of the walkability was something very important. Yes, there's some nice sidewalks that run parallel to Waukegan Road, but to get from Gloucester, from Lake Forest Chateau, from Colony Square, it's a little bit harder to get to those, to the shopping centers themselves. And you have the crossing Waukegan Road issue. So one of my brainstorms, which I don't know how practical it is to have a pedestrian overpass that connects the east side of the district to the west side of the district, right where that stoplight is now. Some kind of a pedestrian overpass that allows pedestrians safely to get across, even if the speed limit does not get reduced like we're hoping. Let me also mention the use of the comprehensive plan. I think, again, you had a good idea about using it as an evaluation tool as well as a planning tool. I also think there's an opportunity to use the comprehensive plan as a marketing tool. I know that there's always this issue of, does the city set the environment to attract the market, or does the market dictate the environment for the city? And that's a delicate balance. You don't want to go overboard. But it seems to me that a developer is going to read a comprehensive plan and be apprised of what's available. And that's why we always talked about a lot of flexibility with mixed use. And finally, the historical significance. Way back when I appeared before you on a certain corner that was being reviewed, I did a lot of research about St. Pat's and the significance of that corner, that area, and learned that it actually grew up with two merchant sailors that were killed and ended up getting buried at that cemetery, and that goes way back to the 19th century. And so there is a lot of historical significance that we could actually exploit. And having said that, in connection with those sailors, it made me think, well, this is Lake Forest, why don't we emphasize the lake and make it a navigation, a sailor, a waterway navigation kind of a theme? So the banners would stress the lake and the water as a theme to attract all kinds of attention to the area. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to give testimony? Okay. Seeing no further questions from the public, we'll now move to final questions from the commission to the staff, and also directing the staff for requests for any additional information. Commissioner Douglas?
I have no more questions. I have a couple comments for later, but
Okay.
yeah.
None. Thank you.
Commissioner Athenson?
No, I have comments, so.
Commissioner Dixon?
No other questions.
Okay. Then, at this point, we'll move to discussion among, well, unless staff has any comments to make to public testimony. Okay. Commission discussion and comments. So this is an open meeting. The public portion is closed, but you're welcome to listen to the comments from your commissioners. Commissioner Freeman, you want to start us off?
Please. So I think in addition to forwarding along the comprehensive plan, Kathy, I'm just, if appropriate, I do feel there's some sense of urgency as it relates to 3 items. One is the city-owned property that's located at the northwest corner of Everett and Telegraph. 2 being a review of the B1 district zoning, and 3 being the property that we're discussing as a transitional piece between the business district and the similar, as currently zoned, the 1.5 acre lots located to the west. The reason I feel that there's a sense of urgency that those be sent back and that we get moving on those as a city is much of the discussion that we've had here over the two most recent proposals that have come before the city. This business district, I think, is, you know, to your point, Commissioner Atherton, it did not develop the way that I think most of us who live in the 4th Ward, and frankly, the only reason I'm focused on the 4th Ward is I don't think it draws anybody from any other wards. I mean, maybe the 3rd as well as the 4th, but I mean, it really has not. And we can talk about it all we want, but we have to create an environment, and that's why I do very much appreciate the work that's been done here, because these sidewalks, I mean, they're very walkable. I mean, and I remember in one of our first meetings, you were asking, are there sidewalks there? And I'm like, they're beautiful sidewalks. The problem is, there's some grading issues as it relates to some of these properties where the sidewalks maybe aren't as approachable by a building. And so I like the suggestion that there be buildings where it's a multi-use potentially, where you've got commercial on the first floor and residential on the second, and you push the parking to the back. I mean, it was one of the things that we talked about with both of these developments that came before us most recently. You know, it would be nice if it had more of a business district feel where the buildings were pushed out front. And so it's just really hard to do that in the current zoning, and it has to be the businesses that draw, because it is very walkable from the west campus of Lake Forest High School, and I say that because my kids routinely walked it when there was a McDonald's that drew them there, where they could hang out and have something to eat after practice or whatever it is. But we've lost that McDonald's, and so I think we've achieved much of what we could within the B1 zoning by that connectivity and walkability among the parcels. So, but it just needs to be, there needs to be more direction. And I do think, again, there's a sense of urgency in my mind, because I worry about what will happen to all of, and I mentioned this during the most recent approval related to the newest bank in the neighborhood, is that there may be parcels that become open, and that zoning needs to be in order as we start looking at these additional parcels, or we will simply replace banks with office buildings. And that is not going to draw the kids from the West Campus. That is not going to draw the neighbors from the transitional housing that we're talking about. These should be walkable spaces to draw people to that area and do it in a way that's safe. I don't think it's an infrastructure problem largely right now. I think it's the businesses that are located there. They just simply do not draw the public in the way that we're talking about it. So, I mean, Sunset is kind of, that development is it's kind of its own thing, and that's also one that I think would be very difficult to do much of what the group talks about, like pushing the buildings forward. The topography of that area and the neighboring, residential district make it kind of difficult to, in my view at least, to change that all that much. And that is really the one area that is heavily trafficked. I mean, among all of these. We've seen the traffic studies. The only traffic that's coming through this area is going through there. Other than the 5 bank customers a day or whatever that we were told frequent the other 5 banks. So I think those are my 3 priorities, and I wonder if appropriate, Kathy, in making our motion, not only do we send the comprehensive plan along with our support, but we urge the city to move on, those 3 categories.
Sure, we do intend to recommend action steps, so we've noted those.
And, sorry, but which have you designated action steps so far? Because I know you requested those, and we do have, I have a few here to add, which we've already, I think, discussed, but.
Well, I heard the 3 that Commissioner Freeman has
Right, but I
requested
just-
so far, and we'll hear what the rest of you have to say, and staff will be making some recommendations as well.
Okay, but could you repeat what those 3 specifics are?
From Commissioner Freeman?
Yes, yeah,
Yes, review the B1 zoning district.
right?
Address the city-owned parcel on the northwest corner of Telegraph and Everett Road, and address the 10-acre transition parcel.
And what does it mean to address?
Well, that will be up to the council, but what I'm hearing from Commissioner Freeman is that sooner rather than later, we should look at implementing the recommendations in the comprehensive plan in some formal way. I think with the B1 zoning district, that is something I think will come back to you very quickly. Certainly with the 10-acre property, that's privately owned.
Right.
We would want to have discussions with that property owner if, again, depending on the priority, the council will establish a priority. I don't expect that they will direct us to implement 10 action steps all at one time. My guess is the B1 zoning district review is probably going to be one of the top priorities. So I've heard those 3 issues as,
Well, those 2 properties I consider one issue, then was the last issue, because it was a very eloquent presentation, but I got lost in what the 3 points were. So is the 3rd point moving buildings to the front and not having parking in the front?
So
On a commercial real estate basis, that's a very difficult thing to put on a building owner, a
the
business out
B1
there.
zoning district could speak specifically to building placement. But again, the city, the comprehensive plan isn't going to dictate that a private property owner build a building at a certain location. So the B1 district is the tool that can be used to encourage certain things as properties come available for redevelopment.
Okay. So if each person, as they raise their issues, would restate at the end for clarity for all of us, I'd appreciate it.
So do you want me to just
It's a-
restate the 3 that I had? So
hasn't
on
Kathy
that,
just done that?
yeah, I think it's close. I mean, except, so again, I would urge that the city consider movement, that the city council take some action to market that property. Again, that's the city council's purview, but I think we're an advisory, so I would advise that should move. And I think in addition to reviewing B1 zoning, I think we should take a look at the zoning for the parcel to the west of the Lake Forest Chateau, south of Everett Road. So those are my three.
And I think in this current climate, I wouldn't put pressure on the city to consider a sale of that property because it could be important to all the commuters coming and going at that train station. I've noticed in Fort Sheridan, just in the last 3 or 4 years, much more of the parking is being used now over there than had been used in the past. So, but that's just on that one point. I would also like to add some of what we discussed in the April 10 meeting, which Mr. Sugar also listed. Some sort of signage could be an action plan to somehow, I don't know if it's banners or an historic sign or something we talked about, and then unifying the painting on the sidewalks, because, on the crosswalks, I should say. The sidewalks are there but hidden. And as they said, we saw the sidewalks but no pedestrians. But the sidewalk the crosswalk painting was 2 or 3 different types, and some was much clearer than others. And that might be a simple, straightforward step that the city could take. I don't know if you need IDOT approval for that or not, but to to just try to start a sense of community on that site. Anyway, I welcome comments from the other commission members.
Okay, I'll go. So I will repeat myself. I really think the comprehensive plan should be the guiding document for the city of Lake Forest boards and commissions in their deliberations. And I think we should recommend to the city council that they encourage that to be part of their deliberation, and that it becomes an emphasis just to make it the tool that it should be. So I also think that this plan needs to provide direction for maintaining and providing the character, defining the character, like Mr. Sugar said. I think the character's there. As I had mentioned back in April, my family has a long history in this area as one of the first Irish settlers in this area, and we donated that land for the St. Pat's Cemetery. No one knows that. No one would know that just walking in that area. So I think part of the attraction of this area could be the historic nature of what it once was, but also you need some kind of destination, something there that's going to draw people there. I look at Settlers Square and think of what it could be. Right now, we have 2 banks, and our zoning has allowed that to happen. 2 banks that don't provide any kind of pedestrian traffic, any kind of activity at all. It's dead space. So where you have a potential area for a destination, for a little mini market square, if you will, the West Town Lake Forest Center, but you have nothing for people to come and see. So how do we, I guess I'm gathering that the way to define the character and also provide for destination-type businesses, or even maybe a satellite library where people are visiting that area more often, that are lounging in the grass area a little bit like they do in Market Square, that really, the only way we can do that is by looking at the B1 zoning. That's what I'm hearing right now. But I think we really need to seriously consider what the character of this is and emphasizing it, and be very thoughtful as we go parcel by parcel. Is this meeting our intent in the comprehensive plan? When you get a new parcel up for development, is this meeting the intent of the comprehensive plan? Is this the character we want? Because there's really a balance between development and what benefits the community. And if it's always benefiting the developer, that's not helping the community. And I think that's what we've seen for a lot of times here, is that we're really been pro-development because we're trying to get activity in the area, but we've kind of lost sight of what our character is here. And thus, it's not a destination for anyone, it's pass-through. So I really would like to see this plan somehow try to reestablish that character. Mm-hmm. And I know they've attempted to do that, but my understanding now is that it's done by the B1 zoning, and that's what our tool is to make that happen.
Well, I hate to put Commissioner Douglas on the spot, but you've had a long history with Forest Square, and you have an excellent organization behind you to try and attract quality tenants. What's it been like?
Well, it's been a real challenge to attract traditional retail tenants, for obvious reasons with the internet taking over that space. And that's why most of our replacement tenants are more service-oriented or food-oriented. I struggle to think of, you can buy a hearing aid, but pretty much everything else is either a service or something to eat or drink. And that's sort of the state of the retail space these days, and the same thing's happening across the street, unfortunately.
So I ask, what can the comprehensive plan do to respond to these changing markets? I agree a lot with what Kathy had said, that if you draw these plans too tightly and you're too restrictive, you're not able to respond quickly to whatever the market brings.
Right, changes. It's a
But
balance.
that's not the purpose of the plan, right? I mean, the plan is to try and state what the vision, can be. And I think that is, in my opinion, I think with all the hard work that we've talked about here tonight has occurred, and that's and has been expressed as best as it can be in the section for the comprehensive plan that's before us. And I respect Commissioner Athelson's strong desire to try and capture or recreate the character there, but I don't think that that's the purpose, or the vehicle to do that is not with this section of the comprehensive plan. It might be another vehicle, it might be the other, the zoning, the designation, but I do think that this section of the comprehensive plan does capture the spirit of what needs to occur there in the future, in my opinion. And with that said, I would agree also with the recommendation, or stress the recommendation that's already been made by Commissioner Freeman in regards to the city-owned property, to look at the zoning. And all we're saying is look at the zoning, and we're trying to have a better controls on what goes on in the future for those properties. And I think then, what you said, Chairman, in regards to the infrastructure there needs to be more uniform. We need to look at the safety, the lanes, the painting of the lanes, the possible overpass. All those need to, and I think that is captured in here in a general sense, without going into the finer granular detail of what actually needs to be done. But I think, especially on I think it was the last document in the series of maps that we have, really highlights what needs to be done. And there's grading issues, and the sidewalks, and their elevations, but all that needs to be looked at in the infrastructure of the street there. And as I said earlier, in my opinion, that really, to tighten that up as much as you can, that's going to have the greater success from the business standpoint, if there can be, better and safer accessibility from a pedestrian and a vehicle, maneuverability in that area.
Because look, if you, sorry.
Yeah, I would just say that I think this document does increase mixed use, suggestions for mixed use. I think this document.
Which we want.
And I think this document gives the broad direction under which we can adapt to market changes, but not destroying the vision that Commissioner Athenson raised.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, the question becomes which comes first. If we can draw people to the area, they will learn more about the history of it. Trying to highlight the history when nobody's showing up is not going to be very effective. So I think we've got to figure out a way to serve that need first, right? And I think some of the suggestions that were made about some signage and things like that are, those are low impact, those are easy enough to do. But, you know, again, my concern in the sense of urgency is, and I mean no ill will to the businesses that are currently operating there, but I just suspect, given the way retail is going, including retail banking, that we will face this issue sooner than later, and I would urge city council to let us be ready.
You know, the other thing that I had mentioned before that I think might be appropriate to recommend is that we establish some kind of evaluation process to see how we're performing against this plan in the next 20 years. So occasionally, maybe it's with the strategic planning process every 5 years, just see how we are performing against this plan. And if-
Not necessarily this section, you're talking about the plan in general?
Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
plan. Just so we know that, okay, we're on track in this area, we're not on track in this area. Pros, cons, you know, it's kind of like the whole idea of taking the bus trip around and seeing, oh, what were the properties we didn't do so great on, and what did we have success on? Let's do that with the comprehensive plan, so we ensure that we're fulfilling our vision here. But Kathy, let me ask you this too. Maybe I'm just so repetitive, and I apologize, but is there something we can add to this plan that encourages them, whoever it is, to establish some kind of character, or emphasize the character, the past character, the present character? Have we really, I don't even know if we've defined it in this document, really. Can we do that in this document, or?
There's a reference.
We tried to pick up on that comment to identify the character. Are you suggesting we actually, probably this document isn't the right place to do a history of the area? We certainly have other surveys and other locations where we have historical information. So I'm not quite sure. Certainly if this language doesn't seem adequate, it can certainly be enhanced.
I'm just thinking, like, you know, when you're looking at a neighborhood and you're looking to build in a new house and it has to be compatible, you really survey the neighborhood to determine what the character is and how that house is going to fit into that character. So I'm kind of thinking about the same thing here. You're looking at the character of this area. What was the defining area of this character? What's significant about this area? What is going to be attractive to people? We already have like Settlers Square there. Everyone calls it Settlers Square, but what is that? And can we better define that and kind of build on what the 98 plan talked about, creating a destination mini market square in that area where people will come just because it's a destination and it's the center of this Westlake Forest area. We don't really have that right now. How do we encourage them to develop that, or to, I don't know, maybe I'm just talking
Well,
off the top
it
of my
gets
head,
back
but-
to the question we had in April, which was what land is available to even have any future control over. And Forest Square, did a very nice job on their architectural design, and then Chase was before the Building Review Board, I think at least 3 times, to connect their architectural design with yours.
Well, really because of Commissioner Berg on this commission,
Okay.
that he was the one who initiated that whole discussion and prompted the redesign of the bank.
Yeah, but I don't mean any disrespect, but that's not something that attracts people to the area. You know, I mean, you see all these beautiful benches and a nice building, but you don't see anyone sitting out there. You don't see anyone going over to the bank just to have a cup of coffee, to sit outside the bank and look at the bank. You know what I mean? Like, you know, Market Square is a different, and I'm thinking of Market Square because that's what they attempted to do here in 98. So.
Did they?
They did, yeah, Jack Preslack. Yeah, he was the chairman, and that's what they intended to do. And so it kind of, because we didn't have an evaluation process, and because we didn't have the right zoning in it, we didn't implement that vision.
Yeah, and I think the geography is just so different too. I mean, I think many of the things that you talk about are listed in the last bullet of the fundamental concepts portion of the plan. How you effectuate that, though, I think really doesn't require city council at all, Kathy. It's a direction from this commission to city staff. At BRB, every time one of these parcels comes up, this should be reviewed. You know, I mean, I think that's the way you know, so you have to set the guide rails through the zoning. You paint a picture of what it is that you want through this plan, and then you make sure that every time one of these parcels comes up, this is the discussion. And then maybe we get closer to what
Right,
you're
because then
hoping to
as you're
get.
going parcel by
Yeah.
parcel.
Because
then
regrettably,
that's
it'll
where-
never be,
But you never know, 20
the
years from
square.
now,
Be-
maybe no one does banking in a building and the bank sells its property. Yeah, I mean, you don't know what's gonna happen 20 years from now.
I
But I
think
do
it'll,
like that approach.
yeah, I think it'll happen sooner. And I, you know, not, again, I mean, we had this whole discussion during that time frame and how, not just traditional retail, but I think the way retail banking has done. And I think there's great pressure. And if we're going to try and create that culture, then we need to get city staff to be engaged in executing against it. And we need to create a platform. Because ultimately, again, we have to draw the businesses. That's what draws the traffic and make it, you know, so all these things we're talking about are great, but there's some fundamentals we have to work on.
And I think also is just having the people there. I mean, we have these large homes on the outskirts. You really don't have multifamily. You don't have apartments above the businesses that could potentially support all that. So I think that's another important element, that what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You want to get the people there, you want to get something for the people to go to, you want it pedestrian friendly.
Right.
How do we get that proper mix where it's successful?
Right. Through the zoning. I think that's why we
You know,
we
that's
need to
the
have
whole
it that.
purpose of the first step is multi-use zoning.
Yeah.
In order to encourage more dense residential, which will bring the people who will then, you know, then the developers will see the density and they can justify a new restaurant or a new store or something.
And
it's
they'll
gonna be a
succeed
long
because of
process.
people. Yeah, but it's for
Yeah.
20 years that we're
Right.
looking at this, right? So Kathy, let me ask you, in terms of the comprehensive plan and the comments we have here, can we add something within the plan that says, I don't even know what I want to say, like how we really are expecting this plan to set the vision for defining the character in here, or, I don't know. I mean, do you have any, like, ideas on just, I mean, you've been.
Well, I
through the
think, I
process.
mean-
The
Yeah.
B1 zoning to encourage review of the comprehensive plan and what ways your property may be contributing to the goals of the plan, but
Do you even define what we think the character should be? I mean, you talked about that in your work groups, I'm sure, right? Trying to define this character.
Yeah, we talked a lot about it, and we heard about it tonight from the public too. And I think the city should be encouraged to, because it's not gonna be an individual property owner who determines the character of the district, but the city can help drive that. And maybe the city's consultant, when that consultant is engaged, can study ways of, whether it's through banners or themes like lake themes or whatever the theme might be, pavement designations, you know, sidewalks, landscaping, banners, whatever it is, lighting, to unify the district and make it more pleasing and more of a fun place to be. You know, that, because Market Square, you know, two reasons people go to Market Square in my mind. Number one is to patronize one of the businesses. And number two is because it's so attractive and quaint that it's fun just to walk around,
Yeah,
even if you're
exactly.
not going shopping.
Right.
And so we're lacking that feel. We're lacking number two. Well, we're lacking them both, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And we tried with the sidewalks and the parkways and the trees, and, I mean, it is a little bit tougher because of the speed of Waukegan Road, but I think we could get there if we just made a little tweaks in zoning, maybe saying you have a little bit of a setback where there's more green space. There's things we can
Can
do.
certainly improve it.
Yeah, just to make it a little bit more attractive, but I'm just struggling with this whole character point, like how can we build on what was there and what's significant about this area, and also what might define it better, and maybe, you know, as you develop a cohesive area 20 years from now, is it relatable to that character that we see it as? I don't know, maybe I'm just like,
I do think, I understand and respect what you're trying to say, and I do think on the, you know, the fundamental concepts listed on page 2 and 3, you know, really highlight the points in a broad sense of what you're trying to stress for the character of that area.
And then, as I said, then it has to be between city staff and the various boards and commissions to execute against it. I mean, it's really hard to memorialize that into some form of a enforceable zoning
Yeah,
ordinance.
you
Right.
can't
That's
restrict
the-
the
that's
That's why I'm
property.
struggling.
Yeah.
It's a review process, so I think, you know, I do think we're further along. I think the plan as updated is a great piece of work, and again, appreciate everybody who worked on it. I think we should move it forward, you know, with the concerns that we have. And again, I don't think it requires council action to do what you're suggesting, which is to say, now that once it's approved by the city council, every board and commission that's charged with impacting these properties should be looking at it.
And should be using it as a guide.
Is that a motion, Commissioner Freeman, to move this
Can I
forward?
make one more suggestion first?
sorry.
Which is, you know, back, I don't know if it was the April meeting or if it was in the notes, but I believe city staff sort of charged us with looking at opportunity area 4 and coming to a conclusion which the working group hadn't. And based on our earlier discussion, I'm wondering if we should take the step of actually saying that city-owned piece of land is recommended to be mixed use, rather than sort of dancing around it the way the language does now. And actually put that color on the map, and instead of saying residential/commercial/TBD, make it mixed use. And if we wanted to say lower intensity mixed use or qualified somehow, fine, but I agree that there's urgency with respect to how that piece of land ultimately gets used, and that might help move it along.
Yeah, I guess my thought on that was to let the market, to put the city in the best position possible to market it. And so if they market it, they can certainly market it as a multi or mixed use, right? But not change the zoning. Currently it's zoned commercial, right? But it's the city's property, and we've indicated at this commission, which is where the zoning would come, that we would encourage mixed use.
Yeah, I
But
guess-
let's let the market decide, and then we'll change the zoning, right? I mean, because if a commercial buyer comes forward, I wouldn't want to put the city in a position where they have to come back to us and change the zoning back to what it was
No, they
originally.
wouldn't, though. That's the
Right.
whole,
It's included in here,
multi-use includes commercial.
Okay.
yeah.
But,
So-
you know,
There-
in
it's-
reality, that's a location for multifamily housing right there that would provide more people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Potentially, right, that's why but that's why I think you just have to let it, so,
To me, multi-use is providing the most flexibility, so it hence the biggest audience of potential buyers, I guess.
but designating that in this document doesn't change the zoning and.
That's
or
right.
the
No, it's
way in
just a
which the city
recommendation.
markets it, right? So, okay,
Yeah, all we're doing would be designating it as a multi-use, not changing the zoning at this
Right.
time.
Just
Right.
recommending that
I
the
think that's
zoning be
the
looked at.
recommendation.
Yeah.
I agree.
so the recommendation 4.1, encourage development of this property in the near term for multifamily, residential, small-scale commercial, office uses, or a mix of low-impact uses. That is what's currently recommended, and if we forward the plan as submitted, does that cover your concern?
I think I heard Commissioner Douglas suggest that we actually change the color of that piece. The color was purple,
Oh, okay.
indicating
So-
the uncertainty. I think I heard Commissioner Douglas suggest that we actually color it pink, so it is designated for mixed use, consistent with that statement you just read, and then
Right.
we don't have to change the zoning on it. It can be marketed as mixed use, and then
Correct.
depending on what use comes in, we may need to change the zoning, but at least then we're responding to whatever proposal comes in.
Yeah, that's
I would
right.
agree with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're really just changing the
The color. of it.
the attachment, not the language of the proposal itself.
You see that already as residential, commercial.
I would change the
But there's
title
another
of that
pink.
opportunity area number 4,
It's kind of
because
both, isn't
it still says land
Anyway.
use designation to be determined.
Okay,
So we'll
right.
identify that as mixed use.
Mixed use.
Okay. Will the chair entertain a motion?
Yes, please.
So I would make a motion that we forward this to city council with the recommendation of the plan commission to approve the comprehensive plan update dated 2019 with the edit that we just discussed to opportunity area number 4 and the business district plats, page 1 and page, I guess it's page 5, designated as opportunity area number 4. I would further move that City Council, that we urge City Council to take action on that parcel, opportunity area number 4, engaging appropriate staffing, whether that's a consultant or city council or city attorney or whoever that might be, and engage the Plan Commission as quickly as possible to a review of the B1 business district zoning. And then lastly, the parcel that is identified as the zoning for the parcel that is identified as opportunity area number 5.
I'd second that motion.
Commissioner Freeman, can I make one change? Your motion refers to the April date on this document. I would suggest that with your edits, we date the updated document with tonight's date.
Okay.
So can I ask a question on that motion? So Kathy, the whole discussion. Oh,
It
sorry.
has been seconded, yes.
Yes, okay. So the whole discussion we had about making this a working document for the lower boards, does that need to be part of the motion, or to have an evaluation process, does that need to be part of the motion?
I think I heard that as referring to the entire comprehensive plan document, so I would suggest we actually move forward with creating a chapter or a section that talks about how the comprehensive plan is to be used.
Okay.
So we will incorporate that as our work going forward, but as an action step with this piece, I would suggest that we actually include an action step asking the council to direct that we review this with each of the boards and commissions upon adoption by the council, or something to that effect.
So let me understand, just so I know whether or not to accept the friendly amendment. That's after the comprehensive plan as forwarded has been accepted. That's city council directing staff to do something outside of this document? Or are you suggesting that we now add to the document before it's approved so that,
No,
I
I
just
think
wanna
this
delay the
chapter should
process.
move forward as it is.
okay,
With a suggestion that upon council adoption of this chapter, that we then immediately review it and share it with all the other boards and commissions, but that as we move through the comprehensive plan, we actually have a chapter that talks about how the plan is to be used
An evaluation?
and evaluated.
excellent. And I think the city, I think we've been clear in supporting that idea. How we go about executing against it, I think, is the question at hand. So then I would respectfully not adopt the amendment to the motion, because I think there's another way to handle it. But certainly support the spirit of it.
Any other comments? All those in favor of the motion as amended by Ms. Cerniak, but not by Commissioner Athenson?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion passes. I do hope that you see, the few of you who are left, that we are trying to get many different points of view. Some we agree with, some we don't, some we've got to think about some more, but to keep on trying to achieve more of what the Fourth Ward residents want to see in their area, and we do give careful review to each petition before us. Other items, opportunity for the public to address the Plan Commission on matters not on the agenda. Any additional information from staff? Seeing no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.